We know that when we get people right, we get business right. So I'd like to welcome you back to my podcast that focuses on 3 areas I specialise in: leadership, performance, and culture. You'll hear my guests talking about their experiences and expertise, and will be providing thought-provoking insights around putting the human factor back into business. Each conversation will be accompanied by a free downloadable guide to save the strain on your memory, and resources that will make it easier to put the great ideas we discuss into action. I'm your host, Lisa, psychologist, psychotherapist, and founder of It's Time for Change, and I thrive on conversations that make a difference. So reach out to me. My details are in the show notes along with the resources. Grab a cuppa, sit back, and enjoy. Today, I'm joined by Sylwia Ciuk, Associate Professor in Organisation Studies at Oxford Brookes Business School, and Dr. Kay Galpin, Research Associate at Oxford Brookes University. And we are discussing young workers, hybrid working, and what organisations can learn from recent research into how young people experience the workplace. And there's been a huge amount written about hybrid working over the last few years. But what I found particularly interesting about this research, and one of the reasons that I was really happy to be part of the advisory expert panel to feed back on the draft report, is that it moves beyond the debates about where people work and instead looks at belonging, opportunity, development, and connection. It's really practical. So Sylwia and Kay, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
So to start off, and I know this is going to be interesting because having 2 guests always means kind of like who's going to jump in and who's going to answer, who's going to default to the other person. But I think this is going to be a question for Sylwia. What prompted you to focus specifically on young workers and hybrid working?
So at the time of the data collection and when I was starting to think about the project, hybrid working, so the scale of hybrid working and the importance of it was still emerging. So it was a new phenomenon, even though we have been working. So hybrid mode has been available for a long time, or had been available at that time for a long time. It hadn't been available to so many people at scale. And it was previously seen as a perk, perhaps for managers, those more experienced, but not so much for young people. And suddenly we had this large cohort of people expected to start their careers, so making a massive personal transition in a context that wasn't explored. So we didn't have academic research on the topic. Organizations were not sure what they were doing, what they wanted to do, or the unintended consequences might be, and also how to support young people. But often what I've noticed is that there are assumptions about what young people need, what it is that they expect, but we didn't know what it is that they wanted or expected because nobody had actually spoken to them. So I thought, well, we need to clarify that. We need to rectify this, and we really need to unpack the stories. So that's why we went for an exploratory project. So where we ask in-depth questions and we really make time to discuss. So we spoke to 40 graduates. And we also asked them to show us what it was like for them. So they brought to the interview visual stories using different media that they were comfortable with. And through this, we were able to unpack how hybrid working impacts them, how they're navigating. So get depth rather than the scale.
I love that. And I love the fact that you just have, we need to ask them, because we often forget, don't we, the sort of what actually seems really obvious, asking people how they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they're worrying about, what they're excited about. I think there's often a narrative around young workers struggling because they don't have a sense of resilience or they're not very confident. And I think the research, the report showed that it's not about that, and actually the reality is far more complex. So what do you think organisations are getting wrong about young people entering the workplace today?
Kate, would you like to take this question?
So this is about the snowflake trope. So
okay,
I think there's a common trope around this, the snowflake generation, where Graduates, as you say, are perhaps described as unmotivated or not committed to work or not wanting to kind of focus on their careers. And actually, something that was completely surprising for us, well, not surprising, but actually an additional finding that perhaps we hadn't expected was that, the graduates we spoke to were so inspired, so focused, so devoted on trying to develop their careers. They'd applied for hundreds and hundreds of jobs in sometimes quite challenging circumstances. And they were really trying hard to develop their skills, to learn how to connect with people. We had examples of young people sofa surfing while coming into work, people who were sort of having visa challenges and trying to manage those through their working, and still they continued, still they wanted to start building relationships with managers, developing their networks. They were, really, really focused on what their employers wanted from them. They wanted to research their organizations and work so hard to make this work. So that myth was completely dispelled, that kind of stereotype of the graduate. And I think our message is quite simple. We need to really challenge ourselves to avoid those misconceptions and to perpetuate those tropes. And we need to really focus in, as Sylvia said, this is not about a homogenous group of graduates. This is about individual human beings who have experiences. And we need to really focus in on how those graduates are delivering their roles, and how they are maintaining their own well-being and developing their own careers. And as we know, anxiety and mental health issues are increasing for young people. Some recent research I found talked about a third of recent graduates globally suffering from some form of anxiety, which is quite shocking, I think. Um, and perhaps it's not really surprising given the times we live in around sort of climate change, increasing social inequality, wars, the pandemic. A lot of graduates had their studies interrupted by the pandemic. So that's had a lasting impact on social skills, communication skills, development. So we've got this kind of whole cohort of graduates that are entering the workforce with quite different needs and are having to navigate quite a large scale of change in terms of transitioning from student to employee, their own professional identities, their kind of place in the world that is changing. So I think we need to give young people credit and we need to recognize that they are dealing with some very real challenges. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't also mention the recent Milburn report. So the number of NEETs not in education, employment, or training in the UK has been described as an escalating crisis. 1 million 16 to 24-year-olds currently not in education, employment, or training, struggling to get work experience. We hear about the death of the Saturday job. 45% of those in the report had never had a job. And this is against a backdrop of, health and disability challenges that are increasing. So again, research suggests that in 2013-14, 21% of those not in education, employment or training had a disability or a health issue. It's now 45%. And it doesn't just affect graduates. So if we look at the overarching ONS figures around sickness days lost, 148.8 million days lost to sickness in 2025 at a cost of £85 billion to the economy. So this is not just a graduate thing. This is a life thing, an employment thing. And I think as leaders of organizations, we need to take action and take responsibility to recognize that this is a difficult time to be entering the workplace. And we shouldn't be perpetuating those tropes. I think we need to be much more appreciative in our mindset and flip that into considering the strengths that young people have when they're entering the workforce today and support them.
So it's such an important. I'm going to come on to you in a minute, Sylvia. I want to hear what you've got to say to add to that. But it's such an important message. I really like what you said about not being a homogenous group, because I think it's very easy for people to use labels and just put everyone into that.
Mm.
And I think fundamentally, the workplace now is so different to what it was when we were graduates. And it's very easy for people just to make a connection with, well, this is what it's like for me, so this is what it's like for them. And actually the world, as you just said, is so different now. And actually everything feels like it has changed, and we live in a very, as you say, that anxiety provoking world. Like there is so much that is causing a lot of stress or emotional burden for young people. So those statistics sadly don't surprise me, but probably because like this is my world. But it is when you hear them, it is shocking, and it really does highlight that point you just made about it's not just about graduates, it is about a wider society, all organisations. Sylvia, what were you going to add to that?
So I wanted to add a point to Kate's observations about and what we've been discussing, this generational assumptions. So we often hear about Gen Z and what it is that Gen Z wants, what it is that characterizes Gen Z in terms of motivation, attitudes to work, preferences, commitment, communication styles, etc. And that's a very tricky business because on the one hand, that comes from studies that look for patterns and look for similarities, right? So these are broad scale macro studies, or studies that pretend to be macro scale. But these are based, so, but we tend to use those. It's very easy to use those generic descriptions and want to be able to predict people's behaviors of individuals based on that. And that is an error. We should not be using generic descriptions of tendencies in a cohort to describe and try to predict how a given employee is likely to behave. Because if we take the snowflake label and the associate stereotype with this, it can have real life implications of how we relate to young people at work. So take a manager, if they actually believe and come to and welcome a new employee, young hybrid worker with the assumption that they are going to be attitudinal problems, they are likely to be lazy at work. Clearly, this is likely to influence how the manager is going to respond to that employee. They might perhaps not give them development opportunities because they think, well, they will not take them anyway. Or they might say, actually, they are lazy, so therefore I need to control them more. And of course, then this then will be observed and noticed by the young employee who might either try to prove themselves and they will overwork and then they're risking burnout, or they might be interpreting perhaps even helpful signs of feedback as, well, I'm being micromanaged, I'm being controlled, because there are also this meta stereotypes. So we know what others think of us, right? And we assume that we know. So if young people know that they are perceived as being described as lazy, that is really harmful to them as well and can have real life implications. So what we are encouraging is to take more, to definitely to be sensitive to those studies. They might raise some awareness, but what they do, they should be sensitizing us to observe, to listen, to adjust. And then we need to use our judgment. We can't use them for certainty. They don't predict. These are not laws. So we need to also be careful and try to challenge our own assumptions and be reflexive about what assumptions we bring into the workspace. So the question is broader than organizations, is us as well.
Yeah, that is such a good point. So thank you for making that. I also think I was at an event a couple of months ago where we were talking about generational differences and actually looking at research that showed there aren't these vast differences. We're putting people into buckets and saying you're all like this and you're like that. And actually, when people were talking about, someone made a point about these young people all talk about their feelings and how they all want to belong and how this is really, they have this need to kind of be recognized and so on. And actually, we then reminded people that actually we all wanted that as well when we were graduates. We just didn't articulate it as well. And we have a generation of people now who do have better literacy, emotional literacy, for being able to talk about that stuff. So actually, fundamentally, our needs may not be that different. They're basic human emotional needs, but they're just showing up differently because people have a different way of being able to express them. I think one of the interesting things that struck me from the report as well is about how people learn quite informally at work. So it's about the importance of that learning environment to be in, also like to almost absorb what's going on around you without it being sort of explicit.
Mm.
So what are young workers no longer learning through observation of day-to-day workplace experience because perhaps they're not so present in a workplace?
So I think tacit learning is a real challenge for hybrid working, but I would certainly flip that again. We've talked about this kind of shift in mindset
Mm,
and think about it from a more appreciative perspective. So rather than missing out, I think graduates have had to think about more creative ways to
mm,
ensure that tacit learning still takes place. And one of the really powerful things that came through from the research was that graduates want to be a partner in their learning journey. So they don't want to have this kind of rote to learning or be told or demonstrated to. They want to be an active, agentic partner. They want to reach out and build networks across their organizations. They want to have mentors. They want to have advocates. And actually, they're quite comfortable to do that online or face to face, to
mm,
engineer those opportunities to build those tacit learning moments, um, perhaps irrespective of the mode. And there's also been research that has drawn on that, that talks about some creativity in terms of skills on the part of the graduate is actually a support to engineering some of those opportunities, which is quite interesting. And I think that's what has led us to think that hybrid is a skill set and it's about combining technology and people in a way to ensure that you still create these moments and you engineer these moments. And you just have to think, I mean, some of our participants were talking about how they'd hosted sessions where they delivered presentations to each other and gave each other feedback, for example. And we'll come on to perhaps other roles that line managers play in terms of engineering some of those collaborative pieces of work or projects where that tacit learning still happens irrespective of
mm.
that mode of interaction. And again, I think it is about flipping that mindset. And I think we just need to sort of go back to that idea of assumptions as well. And I just wanted to bring up the term digital native, because that's also used a lot, isn't it, in connection with Gen Z. And whilst younger people might be more confident with technology, they don't always have the technology, they don't always have the right space to work, or they don't have the right broadband connection. And so, again, this kind of combination of human connection and digital connection is a really important aspect for graduates to learn, but also colleagues and peers and line managers to learn to keep creating that kind of dialogic, tacit learning throughout the process. So I would say it's not a missing out, it's a flipping and a sort of maximizing the opportunities differently.
I think I really like what you just said about you have to engineer those opportunities. And I think it's a really nice reframe of missing out and actually just thinking about it creatively. Because I think back to the start of my working life, and I still remember an amazing guy called Tom McCready, who was a psychologist, and we shared a room. Psychologists were a two-to room, and I felt very lucky to be sat in his space because I heard his conversations. He talked to me about the stuff he was doing, just almost like a running commentary. And I was like a sponge soaking it all up. And of course, if you haven't got those sorts of opportunities, you have got to be intentional in terms of how you create those. And I really liked that bit about sort of engineering it. And I think that's for that sense of belonging. I guess I'm curious as to how people will, what sorts of opportunities people can come up with. You just outlined some in terms of what the sort of skills that people might miss out on, do you think, in
Mhm.
terms of the stuff that they would normally be exposed to, and you're talking about having to engineer that to be a bit different. So are there particular skills that people might struggle to acquire more than sort of previously? And if so, any sort of how people, how can organizations think about that differently?
Mhm. Okay. Yes, great question. And organizations are
Sorry, it's a
grappling
bit
with this.
waffly question. I'm just trying to think about how to phrase it.
So thank you for raising it. I think to start with, it is important to flag up that there are different hybrid setups. So we talk about hybrid in this generic way, that assuming that there is one thing that is hybrid, but hybrid is a constellation of setups that can differ within our organization as well. So in our research, we had hybrid workers that were just working one day from home. And their experience was clearly very different from people who were working in the office perhaps twice a week, and where there were no coordination mechanisms. So people came and went, or teams didn't really think about consciously about the processes. So their experiences differ vastly. So hybrid, as we said, is a constellation, is very different. So the problems will not be the same. They will depend on context. So if you still have opportunities to connect with other people, you go to the office and there are actually people around, you still have the opportunities to observe, to learn. It's not that you totally miss out. They will be different, but it, as we said, it requires coordination and thought. It's not about just being in the office, but it's conscious being in the office. It's the social being together. And actually with each other, not next to each other, perhaps. So hybrid can be done very effectively if it is coordinated and thought through, and we'll come back to that in a few moments. But it is thought through this coordination and inclusion lens, and bonding, what we refer to as a bonding lens. So where we think about task needs, but also we think about the interaction needs, and we create those opportunities. And there are different ways of doing that. But I will come back to your question before I forget it. It's about the skills that potentially are harder. I would say that graduates are not necessarily missing out. I mean, extreme context, there might be when there is just no coordination. If they do come to the office, there's nobody there. We've had sad pictures where young people were sitting on their own, and we probably know them from our own experiences as well. It might get spooky in the office when we are the only people there on a given floor. But looking at the skills, it's largely the soft skills, and this is such a broad category of soft skills. But I would start with leadership skills, right? We often talk about managers needing leadership skills in order to manage young people, but young graduates will also be line managers. They might even start with line management responsibilities. So it is hard for them to learn, in particular also in the context if they line managers need to develop their relational skills themselves. So, how to lead, how to relate to people. So both leading, but not leading, not necessarily from the formal position, but leadership understood as influencing the process of shared change, shared decision making. So how that is accomplished, it is hard. It might be harder to observe where you have fewer engineered opportunities to observe. You might also be missing out on other social skills, such as communication. We know that young people, and this is why I said it is tricky to talk about generational issues, but there is a grain of truth in it, because young people have been brought up in a different setting where they also communicate with each other differently. So they tend to communicate, as research consistently shows, through text messages, shorter messages, short videos, rather than emails, rather than phone conversations, and also rather than meeting people in person. So a lot is happening. Social interactions are mediated through technology, but very specific technology. So if we talk, as Kate said earlier, about young people as digital natives, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will know how to use emails efficiently and in a way suitable for an office setting. Our research has actually shown that emails generate a lot of anxiety. So writing emails to different people, interpreting emails, reading emails, and a lot of effort goes into interpreting what a message stands for, because it is such a low context situation. We just have the words, we don't have all the other accompanying information. So it is really, so graduates expressed quite a lot of uncertainty, anxiety around communication and being able to decipher or deciding which tone. So it is really important then, coming back to this conscious strategy for line managers and organizations, to really help and to recognize this and include that perhaps in the induction, but also throughout the development. So it's not a one-off. We've mentioned this is our tone, and this is what we expect. It needs to be shown throughout. So this is something that needs to be practiced. So the traditional skills, but they do take on new meanings. Let's take also political skill. We rarely talk about political skills. Sometimes we talk about it as leadership or influencing, but this is very much about the ability to read others. And it's hard if you don't actually observe people, if you don't have access to them, if you have meetings online and people don't put cameras on, if you have a lot of meetings after meetings or meetings in the shadow somewhere, right? You don't observe to your line manager, are the people talking and influencing. So it is harder, but they still can be developed, but more as a conscious effort. So if we make them, coming back to your point about how to do that, if we make that part of the development, not a one-off talk. One-off talk is important, just to clarify expectations, make the tacit explicit, but also raise awareness of the managers and support them. It's not only raising awareness, but also helping them develop their relational skills so that they can manage themselves, they can role model, that can support, they can act as a coach. I'm jumping already ahead of myself. But yeah, so these are all those more intangible and still crucial skills, because employers consistently say they want social skills. These are crucial. We know that those are really important. So effort and thought needs to go into how to develop them across platforms.
You have outlined so much there, Sylwia, in terms of all, well, not all, I mean, there are so many skills, but you've given us a really good breadth of the types of skills that people need to think of. And I think it's a good reminder actually of how many of the skills we don't think about, because it's almost a given. Like your email example is a really good one. And it reminds me of, and I think actually hearing you just describe that makes me think of Hitachi Energy graduates, where I work with Gemma Ellison, and we run a graduate program, and that brings together people who are working in the office, working on sites, and some of them work remotely all of the time. And they come together and we are focusing on those sorts of skills. And it still surprises me. It's still such a good reminder of the stuff that we take for granted day to day. It's the simple stuff that people go, well, it's just an email, or it's just going up and asking that person a question, or it's just raising a point in a meeting. And people who are incredibly competent in their roles that they've been employed for feel uncomfortable or anxious about those sort of day-to-day interactions. So I think your point there about creating with intention those opportunities to come together, to learn, to think about how to put these skills into practice, to be able to talk about what went well, what didn't go well. And it goes full circle back to your point at the start of this conversation about we need to ask. It's about having a space to unpick how people are feeling about this stuff, what they're worried about, and specifically giving them advice around that, rather than a kind of global generalized program that's supposed to kind of catch all. So I think that's such a good point. You mentioned looking at this through, well, we talked about managers, and I want to come on to managers next, but through a bonding lens. And it suddenly occurred to me that I know what you're talking about because I've read the report, but listeners won't. So tell me what you mean by bond, and then let's think about the role that managers are playing now in terms of their importance, which is more important than now than ever.
B is for belonging, building a sense of belonging. And I think we might, what is a sense of belonging would be an interesting question. How would you characterize that, Sylwia?
So belonging is feeling that you are part of something, but also part of this is the inclusion, being recognized for your individual properties, for who you are, and being seen as a person. So it is more than you are part of the team, but actually feeling that you are part of the team, and also and that is reinforced when you get the messages, getting signal, when symbols are there that reinforce that feeling that you are actually part of the team, part of the group, part of the organization, and that your role matters. So we're getting a clear sense from graduates that they really want to have meaning at work. So they want to see how they are contributing to the bigger picture. And that was surprising to us. We didn't realize that that would be so important, but
Mm.
actually it was.
That sense of that sense of the wider purpose and where they fit in.
Mm,
Yeah. And then, oh, opportunities for connection. So again, I think this is perhaps what we've talked about, this idea of not leaving things down to serendipity, but
mm,
consciously engineering, being aware of the assumptions that we're making, making the tacit explicit, and then engineering that opportunity for connection in terms of tasks that are given to people, the way that groups are formed, the way that groups are rewarded and performance managed, consciously connecting those graduates with other members of the organization, consciously linking hybrid and remote workers within office workers, as you described when you were talking about working with Hitachi. So really thinking through those opportunities to connect people together
mm,
through work, I think. So I think it does it's hard to make that authentic, isn't it? If you don't do that through a piece of work. I think often if you're doing that in a sort of an inauthentic way, it can feel perhaps harder. Whereas if you're doing it in a way that shows genuine commitment to building that connection,
mm.
then that's the kind of golden nugget, I would say.
Yeah.
And just to add on this, it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to have huge financial investments in that.
Mm,
You can be very creative. It can be lunch and learn session where
yeah.
people come together. So coming together over food is really important.
Yes.
Uh,
Food was mentioned a lot, wasn't it, in
it,
our
it
interviews?
is very important. And the fact that young people really looking for that connection and the relationships and the difference that relations, more personal relationships make for them. So they
Mm,
were looking for much more than having professional relationships at work. They were looking for friendships. Not all of them, but a lot of them were looking for friendships. And this was not easy to do. They were actually forging different strategies in order to make friends, in order to make connections. Make friends, that's one thing, but also having more personal relationships with others. That meant that you don't necessarily be friends with everybody, but knowing the other person as a person, not just as a role, knowing something about what it is that they do in their private life, whether they have dogs or what it is that they like doing. So having that connection, that understanding outside of work created this feeling of increased trust and security, then it was easier to ask questions. So the need for connection is really important. It shouldn't be really overlooked by organizations and line managers and
Mm.
teams as well.
And then we have N, new routines and skills. And again, I think this moves back to this idea of this transition from student to employee. So these individuals were considering what their new professional identity would be,
mm,
how they would position themselves and present themselves to colleagues, how they would manage their own well-being and mental health when they were working at home. And so they were taking great efforts to consider things like boundary setting around when is work time? When is leisure time? How did they make sure they were focused and giving their best
mm,
during work time and not getting distracted? Equally, how could they protect their own time? And some graduates did have challenges around pushing back on perhaps demands from employers that sort of they felt to be beyond reasonable in terms of holiday time or you know the end of the working day,
mm,
but also about how could they not sit alone and be focused on a screen all day? How could they manage different types of work that needed thinking or, deep attention versus something that needed collaboration that was perhaps better done in the office?
mm,
And so it's all of those new skills and routines that the graduates were thinking about. Sometimes that was part of a structured induction or development program. Some organizations opened up things similar to LinkedIn Learning to say, this is a whole library of stuff you can go and explore around your kind of passions, which might have been communication skills or leadership skills. So it's a huge learning process for those graduates, which I think again, when we think about assumptions, it's tiring starting a new job,
yeah.
even as an established professional. So, thinking again, this is double, triple, quadruple that when you're sort of shifting from student to employee. So all these new skills and routines kind of coming into the mix.
Sometimes it is old skills, but in new disguise. They mean just slightly different things. And they are both, as Kay mentioned, very practical. How do I actually manage my time? How do I do that when I go to the office? Where do I put the social meetings? Do I do it at home or do I do it in the office? Um, or some of them are relational. Like, how do I communicate with different people? Is there any particular style that works best, or do I need to adjust and be adaptable? So you'll be working across generations in the office, so you need to be able to read and adjust to that. So a lot of them are relational and a lot are practical as well. And D comes is relates to dedicated support. So we believe in that. I believe we made that clear already, is that we think there are no solutions that work for everybody. So that's why in our report, in all our materials, we highlight that there are some common themes, but you need to be able to think and adjust and have that flexibility. So solutions that work best are the ones that do have that inbuilt flexibility, so that you don't necessarily provide a big screen to everybody, because some might just not have space where to display this, but somebody might benefit from something else. So perhaps thinking of a cafeteria support, but also recognizing that a mode of work requires a particular support, because as we said, there are challenges with regards to the skills development. There are also there's a lot of precarity that we haven't touched upon. So when young people, often their financial position, if they don't have family support, might be very precarious. Some students struggle with visa status, so they feel their precarity even more so. They need to have company sponsors. Um, if they have accommodation that might not be in the right location, they might not be able to afford another one. They might really have to sofa surf. So or working in a very small space, not suitable for working from home, but still they enjoy that opportunity, or they can't afford to live elsewhere or to commute. So we need to be cognizant of the variety of conditions that graduates are in, and their needs, and try to listen and to accommodate if possible.
And I think everything you have both said really highlights the need for good managers. And I'm interested to know from the research you've done what good managers are looking like in this space. Like what do managers need to think about working with hybrid working and young workers? What sort of came, what are the kind of key points that came to light?
So I think there's a few generic things, and I think we've hinted at this before.
Yeah.
So definitely to challenge yourself as a line manager about what assumptions you're making. How explicit are you? How well are you managing expectations? Are you clear? Do you role model those expectations yourself? Are you listening to the graduates that you're working with? So coming back to this kind of more mutual, facilitative, coaching approach to working with young people. And I think also sometimes we load so much stuff into the role of manager, don't we? Now, of course, managers are really important. They're probably the number one contact that influences our experience and the climate of our workplace on a day-to-day basis. And we will all remember great managers at the beginning of our careers, or perhaps not so great ones. But equally, I think we need to, as line managers, remember that you don't have to do everything yourself. So this could be about appointing a buddy. It could be about advocating and introducing to others. It could be about ensuring that the team as a whole works in that way to support new entrants. So there's definitely a bit of sort of self-reflection and self-challenge there, I think, in terms of positioning the role of manager and making sure that when someone's not sitting in front of you, that you don't forget them. So if they are hybrid and they are out of the office 3 days a week and you're really busy, making sure that you remember you've got those colleagues and team members sitting somewhere else and not getting caught up in the moment. And I think, as Sylvia alluded to before, that takes resources, that takes training, and that takes time, which is why this commitment to hybrid needs to be a strategic choice,
Mm.
not a sticking plaster to a particular issue. And Sylvia, you've got some really lovely examples, haven't you, from our research about what good line managers are actually doing?
Yes, thanks, Kate. But just to start, I wanted to emphasize that again, there is no recipe, right? And what works in one set of circumstances might not necessarily work in another. And it is important for line managers to remember that even if they have successfully worked with one or two young people, it doesn't mean that what it is that they needed and what worked in managing them will be exactly the same if you have a new cohort, right? So again, the sensitivity and adjustment is a really important message. And having this attitude and realizing how important that role is, and then role playing, and then thinking strategically is not only about the interactions in the team, but also about orchestrating what happens. So not only what happens in individual one-on-one situations, that you're always there, that you not always, but that you are there, that you check in, that you offer opportunities, but it's also how you locate that individual within the wider organizational and team context. So what environment you are creating as a line manager for others, how you are facilitating connections with others, what example you're setting, what routines you're setting. So thinking about, crucially, think about your attitude, your approach, and also how you then set the tone, what kind of processes you support, what kind of messages you're sending. So it is both about the strategic commitment, but also about this everyday simple routines. So I think this is what Kay was asking for. So sometimes little things can make a difference. So attitude matters, right? This is the starting point. But also there's little gestures. So reaching out to a person after they've accepted, making sure they're there, perhaps inviting them to a meeting, even though they officially haven't started. But just having that invitation is really important. So these are signs of inclusion that are crucial for building that sense of belonging. So consciously using symbolism, the symbolic gestures that say, I notice you, you are important, you matter, or I value you. So making the time to go for coffee. We were surprised how many times we heard about people making the time to listen, making the time to have coffee with them, which was used to make inferences about whether they matter, so about the importance of their relationship to them, and a sign that they are being seen. So it is really important, those gestures. Going for a short walk, showing somebody around, making time to explain, creating this particular learning mindset and reassurance. We know a lot of young people, we've seen the statistics, suffer from anxiety, that they are quite uncertain. We know that they haven't perhaps used emails as communication. Everything is new to them. So we know how important reassurance is. So providing that reassurance, perhaps using personal stories to say, well, when I started, this is what happened, this is what I did, I've made this mistake. So providing reassurance that mistakes are not the end of the world, things happen, and highlighting the learning environment if appropriate in a given context. Introducing to others, perhaps thinking jointly together what kind of projects could be taken on. So there are quite a few things that line managers can do that don't necessarily require a huge amount of financial resources. They might require a bit more time, but they require a particular attitude and then willingness to work with and collaborate.
And I think what you're talking about makes me think of this whole idea that hybrid working can get quite a bad press. Like hybrid working is talked about at pretty much every event I go to, that and AI, but like all the problems with hybrid working generally, not just for young workers. And what I notice from those conversations is that when we start to unpick what the problem is around hybrid working for that particular organisation, is not necessarily hybrid working per se. It's actually uncovering issues within their workplace, so things that are not working so well within their organisation that are then being magnified. It's almost they're being highlighted when people are then working in a hybrid way, whereas before they hadn't really been noticed, they hadn't really been surfaced. Have you noticed that, or is that the sort of theme that's coming out for you?
That's precisely the point that we wanted to make. So thank you for also reinforcing this. Exactly. So hybrid is presented as a problem rather than as an opportunity. And if we switch this and think, well, actually, it's a mode of work that works and that is needed by so many people, it can open up opportunities. It can create connections that we didn't have before, but it requires work, right? It's not something that happens. We can't be lazy ourselves and rely on serendipity here. It has to. It entails work. It entails strategy, thinking, planning, and commitment. Right? Not only declared strategy, but actually the enacted one, and on an ongoing basis. It's not just one presentation, commitment, declarations, but it needs to actually be visible in daily routines. So yes, very much so. And I believe Kate can share some of the practical examples.
Yeah, I just had a few short examples. I mean, if you take presenteeism, for example, and we now talk about the right to switch off or lack of disconnection. Well, that's been happening for years. This
Yeah.
is not a new issue, is it? So the taking the laptop and the phone on holiday or answering calls really late or responding to emails really late. This is not caused by hybrid working. I think it introduces an additional challenge, perhaps, around boundary management. So the availability of technology has perhaps allowed us all to start sending emails at night
Yes.
or then sort of waiting for responses. And I think we see more and more now, don't we? Or certainly in my organization, where people will say, I work at non-standard hours, but please do not reply, do so during your own working time,
Yes.
and so I think that's a kind of quite a nice statement, which is sort of a very mutual, I'm working at midnight, but I certainly don't expect you to.
Yeah.
Please reply when you get into the
Yes.
office
Yeah.
in the morning. But that whole kind of boundary setting and tone setting is really important. But equally, hybrid can be an opportunity around that. So in our research, graduates were using hybrid to set some of those boundaries, to switch off, to have a lunch break, to go to the gym, to go out, to manage perhaps their ongoing chronic health problem when it was a challenge. So I actually think, again, we are flipping that narrative and saying, well, hybrid is the answer to the problem, not the cause of the problem.
Mm.
Lack of collaboration. How often do we talk about siloed working? Constantly.
Yeah.
We all know it. We all probably perpetuate it. But again, hybrid prompts us to be a bit more creative about that and to consciously engineer, like we said before, how can we break down some of those silos? And actually, our graduates talked about it's so great working hybrid. You can speak to international colleagues. You can work with people in different time zones. You can connect with people who might not normally be available to connect with. So again, it's an opportunity. Lack of productivity and commitment. Our graduates felt so valued and trusted. That was a sign, being able to work hybrid was seen as a sign of trust. And it made them highly self-conscious around being distracted. And they went to great lengths to ensure that they weren't being distracted and they were working. I think this again is about flipping the narrative. This is not about hybrid causing the problems. It's about hybrid prompting us to think creatively to what these solutions are.
I really like that. I've just written down about remote working being reframed as a from a problem to an opportunity and
Mm.
serendipity to strategy.
Yeah.
It's a really, really strong messages coming through. So if we're looking ahead then to what good looks like in this space, with everything that we've talked about in this conversation so far, what would a genuinely young worker friendly organization look like?
Mm. A great
It's
question,
a big
and
question.
it's a big one, and it might look differently, right? But for what is coming out from our research, that good is likely to be perceived and experienced as good when we've got an ecosystem of support where good does not depend on one manager and one team, but where hybrid working is considered as a strategic commitment, not a one-off decision. And that is actually thought through and being translated into a coherent strategy that is then again linked to different policies, procedures, but also routines, everyday routines that are aligned. So the alignment is important. It's not that one recognizes work-life balance, but then the personal evaluation processes are designed in such a way that you have to work longer hours. So where there's alignment between the messages and the systems and the processes and routines, where the support does not rely on one person, but is being recognized as shared, where there is more of the listening and relational responsibility that is being shared, where the focus is on commitment, and hybrid working is seen as requiring adjustments. Is not an easy fix, but is something that is the starting point. That needs to reconfigure other organizational processes. And there are specific examples, I think, that Kate might want to mention.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I was just going to sort of, again, it comes back to these assumptions. So I think don't make assumptions. We've got new generations coming into the workplace. Don't assume that you know how hybrid will work for them and how they will respond. So I think we have to really think about our roles as managers and leaders and our own identities as leaders in terms of how we position those roles and our own professional practice. So I think there's a real kind of challenge there. There's a new language. So we found that graduates were using memes and humor and chats, and I feel old when I look at some of that because I don't understand it. So the laughing emoji and the thumbs up emoji are interpreted in really different ways across different generations, and and they are used in email. Hybrid is a distinct skill set, and I think the more we start to learn and understand what that skill set is, the better we will be able to develop it and exploit its opportunities rather than see it as a barrier. And I was reading the new industrial strategy, Get Britain Working. Well, hybrid is a really key tool to build inclusion for all of the workforce in terms of creating increased accessibility to working opportunities. And from a graduate perspective, the prediction is that we need 11 million new graduates to be able to deliver the UK's economic ambitions by 2035 in key economic sectors. So, if hybrid is a tool to open that up to include a broader skill set, a more diverse range of new skills and graduates, why are we not exploiting this? Why are we not taking this mantle and moving it further on?
So if people do want to move it on, so if people are listening to this thinking, okay, I get this now and I want to do something about it, what are some of the practical things that people can go away and start to implement or start to have conversations about that are going to make the biggest difference?
Oh, that's a big question.
That's a big question, a big one.
I know, I like asking big questions. This is pretty much my last question, but I'm going to put a big one out there.
It depends who these people are.
Yeah.
So if these people are graduates, it's a different answer. If these people are line managers, I think we could possibly focus more on this. But if these are leaders on HR and practitioners, then the answer is slightly different. And it also depends.
So think about leaders. If we think about leaders in HR professionals, so sort of the higher level of an organization, what would be the key takeaways you'd want them to take from this in terms of going and starting to implement positive change in their organizations?
So it depends where the starting point is as well. So the solutions will depend on the context. So some organizations might already be doing quite a lot of what it is that we are suggesting, but we would encourage reflexivity and checking, really listening, probing. So what it is that works. Perhaps there might be pockets of good practice already. How can we scale them up? Perhaps there are pockets of practice that needs more attention. I would say, consider the attitude and how is hybrid working perceived? Is it perceived as a liability? So then we might need to start with the attitude. We might need to listen what the issues are, what the challenges are of different groups, act on those, and then reflect on the different processes. What is it that can be done? So how to make changes on the systemic level, and then also how to encourage smaller daily changes. So that would be working with leaders, perhaps supporting them, so that change can then be implemented and sustained. Because the issue is about sustaining change. So it is not going to be, as with any change, because it's likely to be possibly a cultural shift. And with those, this is an ongoing process about meaning making and interpretation.
I've got a couple of builds as well. I would say data. Do you know who's working hybrid? Do you know who is? What are they doing? How many hours are they doing? So there's some data, I think, around that. Then also there might be around, well, what's the profile? So what's the promotion profile or the development profile of hybrid workers versus in-office workers? Do you differentiate? You might be looking at your employee surveys. Do you differentiate? Are there any shifts? So I think there's a data piece around this as well, in terms of who those people are, making it visible and consciously tracking and managing any inequalities or differences there. So for me, that feels quite important. And the other, I guess the other thing is we are building some resources. So we're going to get a plug in for our website, which I hope will be included in the bio for this podcast. But we're building some graduate checklists, some line manager checklists, some organization checklists that derive from our report, which are directly linked to the bond framework, as well as some other resources that are tailored for perhaps smaller businesses and sort of some summaries of the report. So it's definitely over the coming weeks, and as this podcast goes live, it's definitely worth visiting our website and having a look at some of those additional resources.
And I would highly recommend that listeners do that, because I know from the report, one of the things that I really liked was the practical advice. I also loved your answer, Sylwia, just now, because in terms of what the key takeaways, and it depends on who for, it depends on their starting point, it depends on so many things. And I think what you're really stressing is that there is no one size fits all, which is absolutely underpins my whole approach to work, and actually reminded me of a podcast episode I recently recorded with Chris and Gareth only a few episodes ago, where someone would ask a question and we kept saying, well, it depends. I feel like you go around in circles and never actually get into an answer. But I think the points you made are really valid, because it does depend, which is why you've got to think so carefully about your own context, your own reality. There is no one approach, but your report is spot on. And I'm really looking forward to seeing your website when that goes live imminently, because it promises to have so much good resource on it for people in all roles to be able to access and prompt their thinking, their action. Wow, what a conversation. Thank you so much, both of you. Is there anything I've missed asking you that I should have asked, the point you really, really want to make before we wrap up?
No, it's been great.
We've covered a lot. The questions were great, prompted us to reflect, think about on our feet as well.
Yes.
So thank you so much also for engaging with our resources, and we hope that they will be useful.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing your website when it's live, and for people to listen to this conversation and get in touch with you. We will put your the report and the website and anything, all your contact details and everything that you share with me, we'll put in the show notes so that people can find out more. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you, Kay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, there are 3 things I invite you to do. First, click the link in the show notes to download the resources for this episode. Secondly, help me extend the reach of this podcast by leaving a quick review on Apple or wherever you listen, and please share this episode with your colleagues so that you can discuss what resonates for your team. And finally, as usual, I invite you to reach out to me on LinkedIn or through my website so that we can keep the conversation flowing. I know listeners often say they're keen to implement some of the key takeaways, but find it tough without guidance or extra support. If that's you, drop me a line and let's chat. Be sure to check out itstimefforchange.co.uk, where you'll find a whole heap more to support you to reflect on and develop your own practice. And while you're there, join the Leadership Lens to stay up to date with bespoke support services like my retained partnerships, where I'm by your side through all things leadership, culture, and performance. Feel free to reach out if you want to know more. I'm a great sounding board for challenges and ideas for development, so grab all the details you need from the show notes. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and to welcoming you to my next episode coming soon. Join me then.